one of those days where it'll be hot a little bit, cold a little bit. You get all four seasons, the full Chicago experience. So regardless of whether or not you want to cool off, heat up, the bar's the best way to do it. We got water, lemonade, but all sorts of other fun mixed drinks, vodka lemonades, rum punches. We got different draft beers, wine, whatever your heart desires. Zach, the bartender, can hook you up with it. Keep in mind, it is card only. If you got cash burn a hole in your pocket, there's a tip jar back there for him. So make sure you tip him well. But in the famous words of Drake, I'll get more drinks going. I'll sound a whole lot better. Keep that in mind. Feel free to visit the bar at any point. Bring those drinks back to your seat. Enjoy your vacation the right way. If you need anything in the next few moments before we take off, I'll be making a real quick round. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Just say, hey, Jack, flag me down. We'll get those taken care of. Then we'll get moving in just a few moments. Thanks for your patience. Same way other boxy buildings might be. Also, on our left, we got Wacker Drive, street in three parts, Upper Wacker, Lower Wacker, and Lower Wacker. Filmed a lot of movies on all of them. Upper Wacker, parts of the Blues Brothers, my best friend's wedding. Lower Wacker is the seedy Gotham underbelly from The Dark Knight. Now don't worry, graduated from Columbia College Chicago with a screenwriting degree, so we're going to talk a lot about the different movies that are filmed here. I'd recommend waiting for some of my other Dark Knight locations, because Lower Wacker is the spot to get lost in the city. I can't tell you how many Ubers I've been in, just going in circles down there. If you're driving, try and keep it to Upper Wacker. Thank me later. And on the right, we've got a yellow onion dome on a building there. This is the Intercontinental Hotel. Now back when this was built in the 1920s, we thought Zeppelin travel would be the way we got around in the future. So that smokestack behind the Onion Dome was originally a spot where you could dock your Zeppelin, enter the hotel, have a valet park, or take your Zeppelin elsewhere. Unfortunately, Hindenburg crash happened a few years after it was built. There's only 25 blimps in the world right now, to give you an idea, so it was never going to take off. But it's a very cool moment in history that's preserved in the architecture of a building, which is the theme that we're going to explore on our tour. What our buildings can tell us about the historical time periods they come from. And you're not going to find a Zeppelin dock on buildings nowadays. It's just that moment preserved in the architecture. But more on that later. On the right, glass facade of the Apple Store. Again, where DuSable first set up shop. This is where Chicago began. And behind that is a white building, clock tower on top, the Wrigley Building. It is made in revivalist style architecture. Very popular style from the 1880s to the early 1920s, just following the Great Chicago Fire. We're starting to rebuild our city, want to prove to the rest of the world that we're just as beautiful as any other city. Only problem with that, don't have our own style of architecture yet. So we copy what Europe's doing and we paste it here in Chicago. This is based off a cathedral you can still find in Spain. And to the right beyond the Apple Store is a building that looks like a French cathedral had a baby with an office building. That is the French Gothic revivalist style of the Tribune Tower. Again, copying that European design, pasting it here in Chicago. Not a lot of artistic integrity there. But fast forward to modern day, architecturally we like to do the exact opposite. We're all about site-specific design called contextualism. These buildings factor in the context of their environment and incorporate it within the design. The motto is of a place, for a place, by a place. You can't copy and paste them anywhere in the world or even in the city that they're in because they're not going to work like they do where they're located. And a great example is in front of us, Trump International Hotel. Now again, those three different terraces or setbacks also match the height of the surrounding buildings. So that first terrace matches the height of the Wrigley Building right next door. Same height. Second terrace matches the Mather Tower, which is the white lighthouse-looking building across the river from it. And the third terrace is the black box barely sticking out the side, the AMA building just beyond it on the river. But it also doesn't just match building height, it also matches building tone. It's sandwiched between the all-white Wrigley Building, the all-black AMA building, so it uses this bluish-grayish glass to create a transitional element between the two. Again, you put it any place else in the city, it doesn't work like it does here. It's specifically designed for this spot. Speaking of this spot, may look familiar. A lot of movies have filmed here. The popular ones, Transformers 3, Divergent, Rampage, where The Rock fights a giant gorilla, and alligator apartments in downtown Chicago. So they had to have every amenity you'd expect to find in a modern city within the building itself. They're self-sustainable. Inside, you can find a grocery store, movie theater, bowling alley, ice skating rink, swimming pool. Even the parking is contained on the lower levels. And in just a moment, you'll see where it gets its name. Right-hand side, it's attached to an actual functional marina. You can access all of that from the building without having to change out of your pajamas. It's an introvert's dream. You can also get a better view of some of the parking on the lower levels there. Cars only come out the backside twice, both times intentional. One was a Steve McQueen movie called The Hunter. Another was an Allstate commercial. Did the same thing more recently. But it is somebody's job to valet park each and every one of those cars. So if you ever feel like your job is stressful, just know it could probably be way worse. Now across the river from it, left-hand side, you can see a short, stubby concrete building, 5'5" at the top, 5'5" West Wacker. We call this the Danny DeVito of buildings, short, stubby, sandwiched between those supermodels. It is a brutalist building, which doesn't have to do with its brutal boxy appearance, it's the material it's made out of. It comes from the French term béton brut, means raw concrete. That rough, unfinished exterior, dead giveaway of brutalism, if you keep an eye out for it. Very popular style in the 60s. It's got their traditional pediment, that triangle design you'll find on Greek and Roman temples. This is a neoclassical design from the 1990s. Now again, we're still using European aesthetics from the past, just like in revivalism, but nowadays we're all about creating remixes, taking old forms of architecture, improving them with modern technology, and updating them to the modern era, which again, where this nice modern glass comes from. A little more artistic integrity than just copying and pasting our designs now. Also to the left, Chicago Riverwalk. Fairly new addition in the grand scheme of things. Phase 3 finished in 2016, cost $112 million in total. It added spots to grab a bite to eat or drink. Amphitheater here on the left where you can catch some free shows or free tidbits of architecture boat tours. We've also got spots to dip your kayak in the river, see it up close and personal for yourself. And later on the tour we'll spot a fish hotel. First building I want to draw your attention to is on the left. Curved glass building. It's the new Bean building. It's Ferris Bueller's dad's office from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But the curve of that building matches the exact curve of the river where it's located. And the greenish-bluish tint is meant to unite the greenish tint of the river and the bluish tint of the sky. So again, it doesn't really work anywhere else if you try and drag and drop it. Also, looking forward across the bridge, you can see a giant Y-shaped building. That's 150 North Riverside, paying tribute to where we are, Wolf Point. The three branches of the river meeting literally makes a giant Y if you're looking at it on a map. This was our first neighborhood. First taverns, hotels, ferries, all cropped up in this area, so we owe a lot to it and pay tribute to it in our design. It's kind of like the hidden Mickey Mouse symbols at Disney World. If you pay attention to Ys, you'll find them hidden all throughout our city. Even the benches at Navy Pier are Ys. It's all thanks to Wolf Point here. And lastly, if you got a giant stick of deodorant, McDonald's apple pie, a Hot Pocket, take your pick. That is River Point. Curved entrance again, just like the curve of the river. Now the beauty of all these contextualist buildings is they're not competing for your attention in the same way that Art Deco buildings do. They're collaborating. They work with their surroundings and the surrounding buildings. Because of that, they don't feel like a bunch of buildings in competition with one another. They feel a lot more like a neighborhood. They blend. It was designated a landmark in 2007. But we still have 37 movable bridges here in Chicago, which is the most in the US, second most in the world behind Amsterdam. And our bridges are pretty iconic. They're called Chicago-style, double-leaf, trunnion bascule bridges. No, there's a lot there. Double leaf means it opens in two parts, separating from the middle. This is a single leaf bridge, moves in one. So a little bit different than our typical bridge. Trunnion means attached to the axles on the riverbanks, and bascule literally means teeter-totter, or seesaw. It's the method we use to move them. You see that giant concrete slab on the side there? That's the counterweight that's required to move this bridge up and down. Sometimes it is 3 times the weight of the bridge itself. They're normally hidden in our bridge houses, like Kinsey Street behind it there, but this one wears it on its sleeve, gives you an idea of just how much weight is required to lift them. And Wednesdays and Saturdays in the spring and falls when they lift up to let boat traffic through to the Mississippi. Keep that in mind, again, if you happen to stay a little bit later into the month. A lot less fun to get stuck in traffic waiting for a bridge to close. Left-hand side here, Triangle Apartments, the River Cottages, built by Harry Weiss, 1988. It's postmodernism, the porthole windows, triangle designs, a nod and a wink to the boats and their sails you can find over here. But when Harry Weiss built these in the 80s, got weird looks. People couldn't believe he was creating apartments facing the river, especially the North Branch, which still to this day is mostly just used for transportation. And why would you want to face a river you don't care all that much about the health and safety of? The more common view to have is that of the East Bank Club, coming up on the right. Fitness club with its back turned to the river. Although all sorts of famous folks have worked out in the East. So there's a big break in building from the 1930s to the 50s. When we come back to building afterwards, buildings look incredibly different. Coming up on the right, 2 large black steel boxes, Gateway 1 and 2. Modernist buildings from the 1950s. Now, after World War II, there's a big surge of industry back to work. We need buildings quick in order to accommodate it. At the same time, we're broke. We need buildings cheap too. So, Mies van der Rohe takes architecture back to its three most basic building blocks: skeleton, skin, and space. The skeleton is the steel aluminum frame that hold these buildings up. They're office buildings, so they're all business. They're not trying to wow you or compete for your attention in the same way Art Deco does. They're just concerned with fulfilling the function of an office building. If they've done that, they've done their job successfully. They don't have to be more. The skin is the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the space are the plazas that surround each and every one of these buildings. Now again, they're very functional, utilitarian buildings, but they're also very sterile, not very fun to look at. And so, we keep these plazas as a spot where you can enjoy your lunch, feel like a little bit more than just a cog in the machine. Just the psychological effect of space that allows you to exist without any agenda. No pressure to go anywhere or be anyone you might not be. Very important when you work in a black box. Also, again, it's left blank intentionally. Art Deco is more about form than detail. But it's still a cool fact it's faceless. If you go up in the sky deck, which we'll talk about in a moment, you can very clearly tell it doesn't have one. So, might be some info to verify yourself. Also in front of us, we've got a building made of pink Texas granite, green cylinders at the top. That's 311 South Wacker, Queen of the Skyline. At night, those cylinders light up. Very beautiful addition to our skyline. However, we learned recently, those lights are a little too powerful for their own good. They have a tendency to mess up the migration patterns of birds. I think it's the moon. So several times a year, we actually have to dim those lights to cut back on bird-related incidents surrounding the building, make sure they can get up to Canada and down to Florida okay. Which is one of the weirdest pieces of information we have on our tour. And behind that is a black building, white antenna on top, king of the skyline, the Sears Tower. Now, first thing I have to mention, is some Chicago-style food. It is worth every pound you gain while you're here. And if you're hungry for something that I didn't mention, steak, seafood, whatever it may be, I'll probably have a recommendation for that too. So come find me after the tour again, I'll be happy to help out. Now back to Wolf Point here for the final time of our tour. In front of us is Merchandise Mart. Talked about the Art Deco style of it, didn't talk about how massive of a building it is. It was built in the late 1920s, largest building in the world. It's got 73 football fields of office space inside, 7.5 miles of hallway. It's so big, up until 2008, it had its own zip code. Pentagon's one of the only other buildings to share that distinction. Now, not much reason to actually venture inside. It's number one, a labyrinth. Number two, wholesale goods. You can only buy in bulk. This is where other stores go to restock their inventories. The reason to come back, 7:30 and 8 o'clock any night you're visiting the city, is the largest permanent digital art projection. That'd be a good way to spend it. And on the right, these floating gardens are the fish hotels I mentioned earlier. Underneath them are cages with local fish species high. The gardens themselves attract insects, so they're an all-you-can-eat buffet for the fish underneath. It's a weird concept, but it works. 10 species of fish return to the river since we added these up here, so doing their job. Speaking of the river, slowly taking it out to Lake Michigan, which is the way it used to flow. Only problem with that was the amount of pollution and waste we pumped into our river. Got carried out to Lake Michigan, which is where our clean drinking supply is. So, people got sick, and we had to do something about it. The year 1900, we finished an 8-year process, digging canals, building locks that effectively reverse the flow of the river. So now you can, it's actual real gold, by the way. It's 24 karat. It's just not very thick. It's 1/5000th of an inch, half the thickness of saran wrap for comparison. But again, real. And just a month ago, Carbine and Carbon opened up a new rooftop bar. So if you're looking for a new view of the skyline, you can get it from the Carbine and Carbon. Just a block away is the London House, recently ranked #2 rooftop bar in the whole U.S. So if you're looking for a nationally ranked view, London House is the way to go. Keep in mind, impossible to get in on weekends. Do a weekday if you have that luxury. And we got 4 buildings sandwiched together in front of us, from the glass one on the right to the tan London House I just mentioned on the left. Very common sight in most modern cities, but in Chicago, not usually how we do things. By comparison, you can see on the left the amount of space we usually keep in between our buildings. We're very intentional to leave and cultivate space here as a city, which has an interesting psychological effect. If we feel a little more laid back than maybe some of the other cities you visited, that is the end result of that space. Again, our public parks, the plazas, the framework of the Burnham Plan. So, while you're here in Chicago, pay attention to that space. If you're paying attention to it, having picnics in the park, riding bikes along the lakefront trail, you also notice how it makes you feel. A lot more open, free, clear, and less claustrophobic than maybe some other cities you've been to. New York. So one of the best again is the Wrigley Building, made of 250,000 white terracotta tiles. And each one of those got to be washed by hand. So you can imagine the task that it is to wash the entirety of the building. It's named after William Wrigley Jr., saint benefactor of Wrigley Field, Wrigleyville, up north where the Cubs play. Another neighborhood with a nightlife. If you're looking for more of the sports bar theme, again, Clark Street is the one you want to see. It's off Addison on the red line. But Wrigley here started his business in this building as a cleaning supply company. When he would send out his cleaning supplies, he'd send complimentary pieces of gum with them, sort of a thank you for choosing us. The gum was so good, it overshadowed the cleaning supplies, and eventually he just became a chewing gum company. So if you ever had Big Red or Juicy Fruit, that's Wrigley's. Started right here selling soap. Bit of an interesting transition, but it worked out pretty well for him. And also on the left, again, we got the French Gothic revivalist style of the Tribune